And then we come to, how does Elizabeth deal with the problem? The best way to talk about, should we say, Elizabeth's changes is to understand what the government's situation or the government's approach to poorer people was to start, which followed on from these two guys, Henry VIII and Edward VI. Both of them had kept laws about beggars the same for basically about 50 years. And the idea was that they would punish beggars. They would publicly punish people who were begging for money in the street so that others were dissuaded from begging in the street, so that there would be less visibility of poor people. The order of punishments included, should we say, for a first offence would be being placed in the stocks. Have you ever seen someone with their hands through some wooden holes and their head through a wooden hole and things being thrown at them? This would happen first. If you were caught twice and it was able to be proved, you would be whipped in public. Painful punishment. If the third time, they would burn a hole in your ear to essentially mark you as a beggar that's been caught 3 times, and any more time than that is hanging. This series of punishments for being poor had been the system when Elizabeth came to power, and Elizabeth used it for at least 20 years until the problem of so many poor people begging for money on the street was so visible and widespread that it had to be addressed. Because I have to just straight up tell you, punishment is not a solution to the problem of poverty. Poverty, the thing that people can't afford to feed themselves properly, is a societal issue. It's not a behavioural issue. It's not someone choosing to not feed themselves. It is someone who cannot do it because society's blocked them from doing this. Now, Elizabeth, not to be fair to her, decides, I'm not going to solve this problem straight away. I don't know how to solve it. So rather than rely on the great chain of being and the goodwill of people nearby, Elizabeth demanded that local, should we say, governments figured out what to do. They said, your responsibility from me is to deal with the amount of poor people in your cities. They need you to essentially fix it, reduce the amount of poor people. Off you go, is basically what she said. And for a few years, some cities were forced to now come up with a plan. And we look at 3 cities in the book because they give us different ideas of how to address this societal issue. So the city of York, the one that's closest to us, I think, started to issue out beggar licenses to people, giving their master beggar to watch over the others. They used poorer people and beggars in spinning factories, and you know what? They punished them again and sent them to basically a special prison to make sure that they would correct their behaviour and become a worker, essentially. York doesn't seem to be the system that sounds different to Henry and Edward because, frankly, I don't think they were being incentivised to be different. Ipswich, meanwhile, which is towards the Midlands of the UK, tries to do a licensing system. It tries to give people licenses just like York does, which seems an interesting idea, bad idea, but they actually do something different here. They realise that people who are injured and can't afford treatment are kind of stuck and they can't get out of it. So they introduced a hospital that was specifically for older people and sick people who could not afford treatment, because if they can get healed from their illnesses and problems, that means they could go and get a job again, which means they could get out of poverty. When they realised this, they started to introduce a youth training scheme. They would, train people in certain jobs, imagine it like an apprenticeship, so that they can get those jobs later in life. And as well as that, Ipswich, in my opinion, lets themselves down by building a first house of correction as well. They are the first ones to introduce that plan. So they said, let's help you here and also hurt you there. Norwich, which is in the east of the UK, I'm not going to do geography with you, decided to try and categorise poorer people because they realised there were different groups, and the groups they used were idle poor, people who were just choosing not to work or were not actually engaging with work, and the unfortunate poor, where it was kind of out of their control. Now, the idle poor were given work. It's that you have nothing wrong with you, you clearly can work, you just can't find a job, here you go. Meanwhile, the ones who are unfortunate, who are in a situation that means they have less than others, are given food and support by the city. Now, to do that, they needed some way to get the money to support and feed all these people. And what they did is they taxed people differently. They asked all the rich people in Norwich to go and donate basically more money to the government so these standards can be fulfilled. This is actually still in place today, to this very day. And the question is, what are the best plans? But what this did for Elizabeth, at least, is it identified what was working and what wasn't, because you could go to different cities and see what's different. I imagine in York there were still loads of beggars. I imagine that beggars ran away from York, which made the system look like it went away, but in reality those poorer people are still struggling. Ipswich probably had some benefits, but I don't imagine that they were perfectly, say, successful. But Norwich definitely sounds like a step in the right direction for Elizabethan England. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about what Elizabeth takes from this lesson. But if you can recount all of what I've just told you, the punishments, the idea about societal issues, and what these three cities go and plan out and do, I think you've revised this section. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you later.